Let's go on to part 2 now, just focusing on two types of cells, plant cells and animal cells. In higher levels, definitely you learn about fungal cells, bacterial cells, but those are way of high levels. Right now, we look at primary level, easy ones first. The parts that we find in a plant cell and an animal cell. Just the typical parts first. Diagram here shows the common parts that we need to know. Starting from animal cells first, these are how the red blood cells look like under microscope. If we were to identify the crucial parts, the critical parts of an animal cell, we have the outline over here. The outline is like can imagine it to be like the skin of the cell. We call it the cell membrane. It is the part of a cell that maintains the integrity of the cell. If it's compromised, then this cell will just die and burst. So cell membrane just hold the entire cell together at first. Then we have what's found inside the cell. You must have something to fill up the space inside the cell. And what fills up the space, it's called the cytoplasm. Besides the cytoplasm that fills up majority part of the cell, we have the nucleus. And nucleus is kind of like the brain of the cell. It is able to control all activities that take place in the cell. So it must be able to know what exactly to do at what time point, what processes must happen, how does it take place, and so on. These three parts, the cell membrane, cytoplasm, and the nucleus, they are important cell parts that a living cell should have. If any of these parts are missing, then this cell is either a dead cell or it has a very limited lifespan. So for example, cell membrane. If a cell has no cell membrane, there's nothing to hold all these parts together. It will just be a gooey mess. Everything just spills out. So a living cell must have a cell membrane. Cytoplasm is what that fills up the entire cell. So if there's nothing to fill up the cell, it's just space, then it's not able to allow any life processes to take place inside the cell, then the cell is also considered dead. As for nucleus, there are some cells like the red blood cell that has no nucleus, but it can stay floating in the body for a certain period of time. So they can stay alive for a limited time span. After that, they will be removed from the body and replenished again. The body makes new red blood cells every now and then. Same three parts that we find in the plant cell, but there are additional two parts that we only find in plant cells and not in animal cells. So they are the cell wall and the chloroplast. Cell wall, it is a part that is another layer above the cell membrane. So if you remember the cell membrane as like a skin of the cell, this cell wall is like having an armor of a knight that he wears to protect the cell. Definitely, that's one. And also, it forms the shape of the cell. It maintains the shape of the cell. Kind of like fix it because it's pretty rigid, the cell membrane. Besides that, some plant cells have chloroplasts, and chloroplasts, they are little green compartments in the cell that contains a green substance, similar to the name chloroplast. It contains chlorophyll that is able to trap light from the sun and make food. So from here, important to know some similarities and differences between a plant cell and an animal cell. So for this question, let's try. We have diagrams of three cells. Can you identify the part or parts of the cell that can be found in all of the above cells? So what this question tests is whether you're able to identify from diagrams the important parts, the parts that we went through earlier just now. Out of the 5 parts, not all 5 parts have to be written down over here. You just pick what cell parts can be recognized and exist in all the 3 cells. So you can take a few seconds, scan through the diagram and identify the parts. So this question is pretty easy. For some cells like the first 2, they seem to have like a thicker layer or more outlines around the entire cell compared to the last diagram. The last one, it's an animal cell, whereas the first 2, all these are plant cells. And you will see these plant cells again. What is similar amongst these 3 cells will be these 3 parts: nucleus, cell membrane, and cytoplasm. We find that for plant cells, they definitely, if it's living, they definitely need to have these 3 parts to remain alive. So for those who have managed to identify these 3 parts, then good job. You can identify how these parts look like in all these cells. So as a summary, to compare plant cells and animal cells, just remember that there are 3 similarities and 2 differences. 3 similarities will be having the nucleus, cell membrane, and the cytoplasm. And then differences will be the presence of cell wall and chloroplast or not, whether this cell has cell wall or chloroplast.